A newly appointed police chief enters his precinct incognito, eager to witness his officers in their natural element. But when a white officer spits in his face, mistaking him for an insignificant passerby, the precinct is seconds away from a shocking revelation that will leave everyone in stunned silence. On a sweltering Tuesday morning in August, Richard Nelson, the freshly assigned police chief, stepped out of his car in Blue Ridge, a quiet town nestled in North Carolina's rolling hills. Dressed in a faded plaid shirt, worn-out jeans, and sneakers showing years of use, he hardly fit the image of a man who had spent 20 years climbing the law enforcement ranks. But that was exactly his goal. Richard wanted to see the truth of his department, unpolished and unfiltered, not the rehearsed pleasantries of an official welcome. As a black man stepping into leadership at a precinct marred by rumors of misconduct, he knew the only way to get an honest look was to blend in. The parking lot was alive with movement as officers came and went, exchanging casual conversations. Richard took in the scene, noting their easy camaraderie and the occasional glance in his direction. No one recognized him. That was expected. His appointment had been made public only days earlier, and he had deliberately kept his arrival quiet until the formal introduction later that morning. Adjusting his baseball cap, he took a steadying breath. The responsibility of uprooting the festering issues in the department weighed heavily on him. He had faced resistance before, but he had no doubt this would be his greatest challenge yet. As he neared the entrance, distant laughter drifted through the warm air. Slipping in through a side door, Richard went unnoticed amid the usual office chatter and the constant ring of phones. The floors shone under the sterile glare of fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of stale coffee lingered. He moved with purpose, quietly observing the precinct's inner workings. Clusters of officers gathered by desks, some sharing stories while others pored over files. No one gave him a second look, until he stopped near the break room. "Hey you!" A sharp voice cut through the air. Richard turned to see a white officer approaching with a smug grin. His badge read Daniels. Behind him, a few others leaned against the wall, watching with curiosity. Richard barely had a chance to open his mouth before Daniels spoke again. "You lost? This isn't a shelter." His voice dripped with derision. "You need to take that mess somewhere else." The words hit like a slap. Richard hesitated. Should he reveal himself now, or let the moment play out? Before he could decide, Daniels took a step closer, raising his voice for the benefit of the watching officers. "Did you hear me? Get out. We don't need your kind loitering around here." Laughter erupted behind him. Richard clenched his jaw, his heartbeat steady but strong. He started to respond, but Daniels moved in, his face mere inches away. Then, without warning, the officer spat in Richard's face. Time froze. The warm saliva slid down his cheek. Around him, the laughter grew louder. One officer slapped a desk, shaking with amusement. Another muttered about keeping riffraff in their place. Richard's mind raced, his pulse hammering, but he remained composed. Reaching into his pocket, he slowly pulled out a handkerchief, wiping his face with deliberate movements. "Is this how you treat every person who walks through these doors?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. Daniel smirked. "Only the ones who don't belong." More laughter. But Richard didn't react. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving the group to enjoy their mockery, unaware of what was about to unfold. A crackle from the intercom silenced the room. "All personnel, report to the briefing room." It was time. Inside the briefing room, officers filed in, some balancing coffee cups, others chuckling over shared jokes. Richard entered from a side door, now carrying a folder embossed with the department's official seal. From his vantage point, he spotted familiar faces from earlier, some still grinning from the encounter. At the front, Captain Harris, a broad-shouldered man with a graying mustache, called for attention. "All right, settle down. We have an important introduction today." Curiosity rippled through the room. Daniels leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his smirk firmly in place. He was enjoying his morning. Captain Harris cleared his throat. "As most of you know, Chief Caldwell retired last month. Today, I'm honored to introduce his replacement, a man with an outstanding track record and a clear vision for this department." Richard stepped forward. His movements were controlled, deliberate. The chatter ceased instantly. The moment he reached the podium, a heavy silence fell over the room. Daniel's smirk flickered, then vanished entirely. Color drained from his face as realization struck. Around the room, officers exchanged uneasy glances, some murmuring, others staring wide-eyed. Richard let the tension build before speaking. "Good morning." His voice was steady, unwavering. "My name is Richard Nelson." He let his gaze sweep over the assembled officers, then locked eyes with Daniels, holding the stare a second longer than necessary. "As of today," Richard continued, "I am your new chief of police." The silence was absolute. Daniel's face darkened, his earlier bravado crumbling into visible dread. Richard clasped his hands in front of him, his expression unreadable. This morning, I arrived in plain clothes because I wanted to see this department through an unfiltered lens. What I witnessed was revealing. A low murmur stirred the room, but Richard raised a hand, instantly silencing it. In just a short time here, I've seen conduct that isn't just unprofessional, it's unacceptable. So let me make this clear, the toxic culture that has been allowed to thrive here ends today. No one moved. The weight of his words pressed into every officer in the room. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the floor. Richard stepped closer to the podium's edge, his voice sharp but composed. Respect isn't optional. It is the foundation of law enforcement. Without it, we fail not just each other, but the community we swore to protect. The room was stiflingly quiet. Officers squirmed under his gaze, the earlier bravado in the room dissolving into palpable tension. This morning, some of you laughed, thinking you were putting an ordinary man in his place. But let me be clear, every person who walks through these doors deserves dignity, whether they wear a badge or not. His words sliced through the silence. No one dared move. Richard let the moment linger before speaking again. Change isn't easy, he said, his tone calm but absolute. But make no mistake, this department will change. Effective immediately, there will be zero tolerance for behavior that disrespects the integrity of this office or the people we serve. He stepped down from the podium, moving deliberately toward the officers. His presence commanded attention. Stopping just feet from Daniels, Richard fixed him with an unwavering stare. Officer Daniels, he said. Daniels flinched. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by visible panic. You, Richard continued, voice low but firm, are a prime example of everything broken in this department. Daniels swallowed hard. When you spat in my face, Richard said, his tone steady, it wasn't just me you disrespected. It was the badge, the oath, and the very community we are meant to serve. Daniels opened his mouth, but his voice caught. Chief, I didn't know. That's exactly the issue, Richard cut in, his voice firm. You didn't bother to know. You didn't stop to think before you acted because you assumed the man standing in front of you didn't matter. His words hung heavy in the silence, every officer rooted in place. Richard's gaze shifted to the rest of the group. What I witnessed wasn't just one officer's mistake, it was a mindset. A culture where intimidation and bias aren't just tolerated, they're encouraged. His voice hardened. That ends today. He took a step back toward the podium, his tone carrying more weight. I've dedicated my career to justice, not just on the streets, but within law enforcement itself. Changing that culture won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but I can guarantee one thing. As long as I'm chief, this department will be built on respect, integrity, and accountability. He paused, letting the message sink in. Then, with a brief glance at Captain Harris, he concluded, effective immediately, Officer Daniels is suspended pending an internal investigation. And for anyone who thinks this is just a slap on the wrist, think again. This is the first of many reforms. A murmur rippled through the room. Gasps echoed among the officers. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his jaw tightening as he avoided their stares. Richard remained composed. This isn't about punishing people, he stated. It's about setting a standard. If you're unwilling to meet that standard, this isn't the place for you. His eyes moved across the room, meeting each officer's gaze. If you're ready to be better, to do better, then we'll move forward together. But make no mistake, his voice lowered, filled with authority, I will hold every one of you accountable. The weight of his words lingered long after the meeting ended. Officers filed out in silence, their usual chatter absent. Richard remained at the podium, watching as Daniels stormed out, his expression a mix of shame and resentment. The others averted their eyes, their faces marked by guilt, discomfort, or quiet reflection. Back in his office, Richard sat at his desk, exhaling deeply. He knew this was only the beginning. Years of ingrained behavior wouldn't change overnight, and for some, they never would. But he hadn't come to Blue Ridge to make friends. He had come to make a difference. The phone on his desk rang. Chief, it was Captain Harris. I wanted to say, you handled that better than most would've, Harris admitted, his tone cautious. Appreciate that, Captain, Richard replied. But the real work starts now. I want a full report on Daniel's history, complaints, incidents, everything, on my desk by tomorrow. You got it, Harris said, then hesitated. And, Chief, I think you shook some of them today. In a good way. Richard hung up, allowing himself a fleeting moment of satisfaction before diving into the pile of paperwork before him. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the precinct noticeably shifted. Officers who once laughed at Daniel's behavior now distanced themselves, his suspension the talk of the department. Richard made his presence known, walking the halls daily, greeting officers, making it clear he was paying attention. Some took the change seriously. Officer Reyes, a young recruit, approached him one afternoon, her expression uncertain. Chief, she hesitated. I've been part of the problem. I didn't speak up because I was scared of the backlash. She looked him in the eye. I want to do better. That's all I ask, Richard said, his voice firm but understanding. It starts with you. Not everyone embraced the shift. Daniels filed an appeal, arguing his suspension was unfair. But Richard held firm. Accountability wasn't optional. An internal review revealed a troubling history, multiple complaints ranging from excessive force to inappropriate remarks. His appeal was denied. Richard made it clear, the days of covering up misconduct were over. Despite progress, Richard knew the path forward wouldn't be easy. Conversations about bias and community relations were met with resistance, but he remained committed. Even small victories, a recruit speaking up, an officer rethinking their approach, were steps towards something greater. One morning, Richard attended a local community event. A young boy cautiously approached him, his wide eyes filled with wonder. "Are you really the chief?" the boy asked hesitantly. "I am," Richard replied with a smile. "My dad says the police don't care about people like us," the boy whispered. Richard crouched down, meeting the boy's gaze. "I can't change what's happened before," he said gently. "But I can promise you, we're working to do better. And if you ever need help, you come find me, okay?" The boy nodded slowly, then smiled. A small but significant moment. It was moments like this that reminded Richard why he had taken the job. By the time his first year ended, the precinct was far from perfect, but it was undeniably different. Officers unwilling to adapt were gone, replaced by recruits who shared his vision for a fairer department. The community, once skeptical, began noticing the shift, small but meaningful signs of renewed trust. One evening, Richard stood in the main hallway, watching as officers clocked out. The air felt different. The camaraderie was no longer at someone else's expense. It was real. He knew there would always be struggles ahead. But for the first time, he felt something else, too. Hope. Change was never easy, but it was always worth the fight. This story is a powerful reflection on leadership, accountability, and the challenge of institutional change. Richard Nelson's journey as the new police chief highlights the deep-seated issues within law enforcement, bias, toxic culture, and a lack of accountability, while also demonstrating the courage required to confront them. His decision to enter the precinct undercover not only exposes the problem, but also serves as a wake-up call for those who have allowed corruption and prejudice to thrive. His response is not just about punishing one officer, but about setting a new standard, sending a clear message that respect and integrity are non-negotiable. Change, as the story shows, does not come easily. Some resist, some reflect, and others take the opportunity to grow. Richard's approach, leading with both authority and understanding, creates space for transformation, proving that leadership is not about power but about responsibility. In the end, his persistence plants the seeds of trust within both his department and the community. The road ahead is long, but his actions affirm an essential truth. Real change is possible when the right people are willing to fight for it. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel.